Well, hello, Perry Peacock here with Wilderness Innovation, and I'm up in the mountains outdoors as usual, and want to do a little audio program here on moisture handling, and particularly in regards to moisture handling when you're dealing with shelter, such as your tarps or tents, and then your other items such as blankets or sleeping bags. And I just want to touch on primarily those couple of things here today. Now, I want to make note. I'm up here about 7,500 feet elevation, not particularly high for around here, but it's up here anyway a little bit. Still got some snow. Good bit of snow around here, except on the south exposed hillsides. And I got a little fire going out here. I got a little semi-lean-to shelter that I kind of repaired that somebody else had built, and I got my personal survival blanket laid out in here, and it's pitched towards the south where the sun is. So it's nice and cozy, and I'm out of the wind a little bit, and it's a great time up here. A great day. Just finishing breakfast, and I might be munching on a little something while we're talking here. I don't know. But anyway, the two main things that you're dealing with as far as moisture handling is keeping it out. In other words, keeping it off of you, away from you, out of your gear, that sort of thing. So that's the one problem. That's the thing that most people spend a lot of their time with, is that. And then the other thing is getting it out. And I kind of think of that as, a lot of times you could keep yourself dry from the outside only to wind up getting wet from the inside, because our bodies are pretty the majority of our body contains water, and so you try enclosing a body of water inside some waterproof item, and at some point there's going to be some buildup of moisture just coming off your body. So that's the two things that we have to concern ourselves about today. And I'd like to start off kind of talking, first of all, shelter-wise, about tents versus tarps and stuff like that. And sometimes you get people that say, "Oh, you can't use a tarp on such and such a trip or whatever. You got to have a tent because of the weather or something, And given there are definitely places where a tent is the item of choice, absolutely. But much more of the time than people realize, a tarp works very, very well, and in my view, I kind of like the openness of a tarp or a lean-to type shelter, because you're escaping from the cities and civilization type deals, and getting to the outdoors where you can enjoy the wildlife and the plants and the birds and everything like that, and only to hole yourself up in a tent that you zip all in and zip all down, and you're all, might as well be in your house. Excuse me. But, obviously tents do have their place, and I've used them before, and not very much. I mostly use tarps, but anyway, here's the deal. The tent, typically most tents nowadays do have a floor in them. They've got the bug netting and all that sort of thing. And that's what a lot of people are looking for, is to get out into the wilds and then crawl into something that they can zip themselves out of the wilds into. And, and if that's your style, that's cool, and there's nothing wrong with that. Myself, I prefer to be out in the wilds and having it all around me. And so I avoid that when I can. But One thing that's become, like when I was a young kid, my dad bought me a pup tent, and and that pup tent was great. Me and some of my friends and stuff, we'd put our tents up in our backyards, or when we went up camping, put them up and get in them. And the pup tents back in those days did not have a floor. It was just an upside down V, and you had a back end to it, and a door that you could tie shut with some tie straps that were on there. And you had to use poles, a pole in the middle in the back and a pole in the middle in the front. And that's kind of what I grew up with initially. And I've had tents with floors in them and all that sort of thing. And we own actually quite a few tents. But one thing that's gotten very good in tents, and perhaps what's got better than anything about tents, is the floors. And that's both good and bad. The good part of that is that you get in there, you don't really need a ground cloth under you, although some people do lay down a separate ground cloth. But most of the floors in tents, even a lot of the inexpensive ones, the top might leak, but the floor doesn't. They're very, very good about getting the floors pretty waterproof. And the downside to that is, when you're in a tent, if you have even the slightest drip in there and you've got a floored tent, when that water drips, it cannot go anywhere. It hits the floor, and pretty soon a lot of these tents have the bath called the bathtub bottom, where the sides come up and that sort of thing. Even more waterproofing, in the floor area. But say you're out and about and storm comes up, you got a couple little leaks in there. It doesn't take much to get a quart of water in there or something like that, and everybody's sleeping gear is wet. And of course, if you have our personal survival blanket, that doesn't matter that much. You can wring it out real quick or whatever. It's not a big deal. But anyway, that can spoil a trip pretty quickly. And I'm sure everybody here has either experienced that or knows somebody who has. Sometimes if you're with a family, somebody doesn't zip a window all the way shut or something, and while you're out on a hike, storm comes up, and when you get back, you got 2 inches of water inside your tent. So that's something to be aware of in a tent, is at the bottom typically protects you from moisture coming up from underneath, and some would say also the bugs and everything like that. Well, you can zip yourself right in, and even though you're in the outdoors, you don't have to experience any of the outdoors while you're in the tent. But anyway, aside from that, one of the nice things about tarps is, or tents without floors, is that if you do get a drip or something, it's typically not a huge deal. I mean, it's pretty common for you to have to be able to watch your tent and tarps every so often and do a little bit of touch-up sealing and stuff, because they get out in the weather and get stretched and pulled by the wind, and out in the if you're out a lot like we are, you get the sunshine on them a lot, and all the elements. And a lot of times we're setting up something and we'll leave it up for 2 or 3 weeks or a couple of weeks. It's not unusual. And that being the situation, you're going to get some leaks here and there. And if you don't have a floor in there, it's not a big deal. Whatever leaks will find its way to the ground and sink into the ground and be gone, and it's not a big issue. So I guess I've probably belabored this point quite a bit here. But I do remember one trip when my family was young, my kids and everything, and we were up on the Utah-Wyoming line up at a lake up there, and we had camped up on the mountain and gone for the day, and our tent had it was a family-sized tent with a nice bottom and everything, very very nice canvas tent, pretty good quality. But the awning that comes out over it, one corner of it had got let down or something when we left, and the effect of that was this awning was basically became a funnel and channeled all the rainwater right down the zipper line, which normally is protected by this thing, by this awning, but channel it right down the zipper. And when we got back, everything in there was just soaking wet, and there was a couple inches of water on the floor. It was quite an exciting time. Well, if we didn't have a tent that the bottom wouldn't hold water, we wouldn't have to worry about it. Just run right out of there. Now, some people say, well, you need to have a bottom in your tent or whatever, to keep the water from coming up to you. But typically you want to be pitching your tent where you're not. That's not really an issue. Where you gotta either well drained or a little bit higher ground or something like that. You don't want to pitch in somewhere that the water is going to, form a puddle and your tent's in the middle of a puddle. So that's kind of, some of that comes with planning where you put your shelter and that sort of thing. But anyway, the other thing is if you're really in somewhere with a tarp or a tent without a floor, and you really do need something down there, if you have a tarp or ground cloth or something like that, you can throw that down on and you're good to go. And so that'll work pretty nicely. Or if you use some kind of a mattress or hammock or cot or something like that, well, that gets you up off of it, so you don't even need to worry about it then. Or you can do a wilderness mattress if you're in a place that has quite a bit of boughs and that sort of thing, or dried grass or whatever. You can pile a nice little pile of that and elevate yourself off the ground that way, and also makes it very comfortable and cozy. So, that's a way you can deal with ground moisture a couple ways. Now, when we use our personal survival blankets, PSBs, typically I don't worry about it that much. I mean, if I can kneel down on the ground and my knees aren't getting soaked, if they're getting a little damp, it's not a big issue with the blanket. But if I'm kneeling down and all of a sudden I'm really soaking up some serious water in my knees, why I need to adapt to that regardless. And I really wouldn't want to even set a tent there necessarily, because you do have the problem of, well, what if the floor leaks a little bit and it comes up through the bottom and your sleeping bag or whatever becomes a wick and absorbs it all. So, a lot of this is planning and that sort of thing as far as handling moisture and that sort of thing. All right, so to give you an example of some things that can get you sleeping gear wise, and just some things to be aware of. A lot of times people like to sleep out under a tarp, or many times it's really nice weather and you just throw a tarp on the ground and throw your bags on there and go to sleep that way. One time I was testing a self-inflating mattress during this last year, and I was using my PSB, my blanket, and I'd just sleeping on the ground, no tarp or anything under me, just that inflatable mattress. Well, I knew it was going to be a little bit rainy during the night, and a lot of times I use my blanket out in the rain without a cover on, because it does pretty well without a cover, even in a little bit of rain, And the one thing that I did run into that normally I would sleep on the ground or on a bed of boughs or something, and but what happened was the moisture would run around the surface of the bag, and then it would get down onto this pad, and of course the pad's totally waterproof. And so what I found out was my hip area was basically a puddle of water because everything settled to there and I had nowhere to go. So, if I'd have slept like I normally do, throw a few boughs on the ground or whatever, just sleep on the ground, Probably. Usually I don't really get much in the way of water to worry about. So that's the other thing is you got to think about, if it does rain or something like that, make sure that, for example, if in that situation, make sure that, you're not going to be collecting water that you're going to be laying in. And even if you have a tent, some people put a ground tarp underneath the tent. And if any of that sticks out past the wall of the tent, then when the water runs down, it'll just funnel right underneath, and you'll have a little lake that you'll be laying in. And hopefully the bottom of your tent's totally waterproof, or you'll be nice and damp by morning. So anyway, basically keeping the water out is the maintenance item. Sometimes I'll set a tent or a tarp up at my house and turn the sprinklers on, and then I can just kind of double check and see, before I leave, I can see if there's any areas that I need to seal. For most tents, just some McNett's seam seal will do the trick. It's invisible, so on most fabrics you won't even hardly see it. So that works good. If you're using a sil nylon, then there's a special silicone sealant that you would be using for that. But it's good, or if you're out somewhere and you notice some little drips developing somewhere, just kind of take note of that, and then when you get back to your house or whatever and you dry everything out, then put some sealer on and you'll be good to go for the next time. So that way you kind of do a maintaining type situation all the way through. So that's the one thing is whether it's a tarp or a tent or whatever it is trying to pitch it in a way that you're going to have the water run off, and so you're not going to get wet from any kind of storm in that way. And you're looking at what direction do the storms come from, stuff like that, and how water runs on the ground. You're kind of looking at that, so you're not pitching like that. We had experience one time some years ago with the Boy Scout troop. We were out doing some the boys were doing some individual shelters, kind of some makeshift stuff, and one boy wanted to set his up in a certain spot, and everybody told him that would be a bad place, and he insisted. Well, about 1 o'clock or 2 in the morning, when a thunderstorm rolled through, this is in the North Carolina, he found he had basically a creek running through the middle of his shelter practically from all the water draining through there, and he was up hollering in the middle of the night, "I'm getting wet," So, a little thinking ahead helps on that kind of situation as well. So now the next issue and the final, really one of the final issue is the moisture from the inside getting out, and you find sometimes when you use a tent or a tarp, and it kind of depends on the dew point or the kind of the temperature differential between the inside and the outside, and the moisture inside versus outside. You do find sometimes in a tent or even in a tarp at times that the whole inside can just become saturated with water and water droplets and all that, and you can actually a little breeze comes up and you can actually keep getting rained on just from that, and that can be very uncomfortable. A lot of that can be alleviated if you're situated with your tarp or tent in a way where you can have some kind of ventilation. If you have a tent, most tents nowadays do have a rain fly. So, and the material of the tent itself typically is not waterproof but is breathable, and then your rain fly that goes over it is waterproof. So you have a little bit of a distance between the two that allows moisture to pass through and circulate out and not become a problem dripping on you. If you have a tarp, then typically you want to pitch it so that if there's any kind of breeze or whatever, you can get on it, maybe not too much depending on the weather, but allow it so a little breeze can kind of get through there, so you can clear out the moisture and keep it from building up too much in there. uh, so that can help quite a bit. And one other thing with a tent or a tarp, either one, is if the surface of that is, if you're really close to that surface, excuse me, if you're really close to that tent surface, a lot of times you might get a little more dampness or wetness because you've got all that moisture from your body, from your breathing, and it's might hit a surface where it condenses, and then it might drip back onto it, or you rub it and rub against it, and it gets on you that way. So that's another way that you can accumulate some moisture. That could be a problem in some cases, but so allow yourself a little distance. If you're using a tarp that's totally waterproof, you want to make sure you pitch that fairly steep as you can, or make sure, especially up around your chest and the upper part of your body, try to give yourself a little bit of distance between you and the surface of the tarp, so you're not causing, because if there's a breeze blowing outside and you're in there, you're creating some moisture, and it's a little warmer in there, it's a little cooler on the outside of the breeze blowing by, and that moisture hits that inside surface of the tarp or tent, depending, and condenses there, and then now you've got a situation where you can create a little rainstorm inside. So give yourself a little distance so that moisture can kind of disperse a little bit, and then that way you stay a little bit drier that way. And then so like clothing and stuff like that, you typically want your clothing to be breathable. If your clothing does not breathe well or not at all, you're going to wind up most likely getting wet from the inside, because your body's going to give off moisture both in perspiration and just the fact that your body's mostly water. There is incidental moisture that does come off of your body, all parts of your body. So so try to allow your clothing to breathe. If your clothing is waterproof due to rain or whatever, you want to try to configure that so that at least some air can pump through there to try to lower the amount of humidity in the air inside, and try to keep you a little drier that way. So that's kind of an important thing. Now I've talked about I think in my last audio program a little bit about the blanket that we have, and talked about that the way I typically use that blanket, especially if it's colder weather, is I put my whole head and everything inside of it, and I breathe into it, and I create my own environment inside of there. And with the way that thing is made, excess moisture typically is driven through the blanket to the outside, and I don't build up excess, but I do retain heat and some moisture content in there, which makes for a nice, comfortable setting, kind of like you would be at your house or whatever, in your bed at home. And so, but because it's breathable in the way that it is, and it doesn't absorb moisture, it's able to handle that and work very well. Now, one other thing to think about here is if you're camping in the wintertime, there's two kinds of winter weather basically. Warm, wet. Well, no. What do we call it? I'm having a brain freeze here. If your winter temperatures are a little bit warmer, then it's wet cold. The other thing is dry cold. So typically we usually say, well, if you're down around 0 or colder Fahrenheit, that's a dry cold. And the closer you get to 32 degrees or Fahrenheit, then you're getting into more of a wet cold. And those situations are handled separately. Like, for example, your footwear, if you're in the dry cold, so it's very below 0 or something like that, or down in the single digits or teens or something Fahrenheit, you can have footwear, and it's actually nice to have footwear that's very breathable. And insulation is very breathable because all that moisture, say up to a cup a day that can come from your feet, can pass through that to the outside, and it'll turn into ice crystals when it gets out to the surface of your boot if it's breathable. And however, that situation doesn't work very well. Say if you're in the snow and it's 35 degrees. In that type of situation, you typically want footwear that's waterproof, typically at least to your ankles or a little above your ankles anyway. And typically in that situation, you want a liner that you can change out so you have a dry liner. Same kind of thing with clothing. Sometimes you have a windbreaker type thing on or something like that, or like our poncho. That moisture goes out, it cannot pass through that kind of stuff, so it stops there, it can't go anywhere. And if you have a jacket or something that's like that and it gets trapped inside of there, well, you can build up moisture and the moisture can wind up freezing in there, and then eventually, and it doesn't happen usually quickly, but if you're out for maybe up to a week or something or more than that, you can wind up wearing clothes that's half ice. So you do want to make sure the moisture can get out. Now, if you we typically have been wearing the last couple of years or so, we've been wearing our ponchos in the wintertime as our outer part of our jackets, and a lot of times wearing the snap-in liner as the insulation. And now that works pretty well in the cold, get down around 0. Because as your body sweats and everything gives off this moisture, it passes through the insulating layer, and when it hits the shell, the poncho itself, it's very cold because it's subject to the temperature on the outside, 0 or colder or something like that. Well, that moisture instantly freezes when it hits that, and typically the little incidental moisture like that is typically very fine. And when it freezes, it basically turns to ice crystals. Since the poncho is not sealed on the bottom, basically it just falls down through the bottom and back onto the ground, and basically you just keep on trucking, and it's not a big issue. Now the other thing is in sleeping gear. A lot of people, some people will actually crawl inside a moisture barrier inside their sleeping bag. So they're sleeping inside a moisture barrier that keeps their body moisture from getting into the insulation of their sleeping gear. And, that has its pluses and minuses, It can help extend the insulating value of your bag. And on the other hand, you can, depending on how much moisture a person gives off, and some people do a lot more than others, you could wind up sopping wet in the morning inside of there. And so you'd have to kind of dry yourself off. But, that's a couple different things there. But typically I like to use systems based on, and I just use my personal survival blankets, and if it's very cold, then I might use more than one of them, maybe several of them, to give me the amount of insulation I need. They're all very breathable. I can actually put my head clear inside of them, and I can breathe into the blankets, and it keeps me warmer in there. I'm not sucking in cold air, warming it up, and then shooting it back outside again. So my body is not going through the thermal changes of heating something cold all the time and then shooting that heated air right back out to the cold outside again. And because the blankets are so breathable, they're not a problem with any kind of moisture buildup typically. And I've been out, where you're out for a week or so, something like that, continuous, and never had a problem with it building up. And I don't know that perhaps if I was on an expedition where I'm out for a month or maybe a couple of months, if that would possibly, at that point might be a little more of a problem, depending on what I'm doing and that sort of thing. But anyway, so sometimes I'll have a tarp or roll myself. Like say I take our large tarp, 10 by 10 tarp. I can basically fold that all the way around me and back underneath me, and then fold the foot under. So I'm sealed in on all sides and just an opening for the head end, and then just crawl inside my blankets inside of that. And what'll happen is the moisture will pass through. It hits that cold tarp and it freezes, and it either becomes just little ice crystals in there, whatever, that you shake off in the morning, or sometimes a little that'll stick to it. You just shake your tarp in the morning, and all that frozen moisture just shakes off into the wind, and I used to call it freeze dry. And there actually is some other techniques along that's actually would be a separate video or separate audio, is specifically dealing with sub-zero and that kind of setup, but that just gives you a little taste for it. But anyway, so that's the two things, is trying to keep moisture or water from getting to you from the outside, so your clothing and insulation doesn't get wet. And then the other side of it is trying to keep allowing the body moisture to pass through and not build up, so you didn't get wet from the inside. And so just a few thoughts on that. And just remember, moisture isn't really an enemy to you. Some people look at it like, oh, that's awful, it's an enemy, it's a whatever. It's just you actually want to have a little bit of moisture so your skin isn't drying out and stuff like that. I mean, so it's not a horrible thing. It's just something that we try to manage. So if we manage it, then we take advantage of it, and we deal with it just fine, and it's not a problem. So, but anyway, so that's just a few thoughts here today on managing water, managing moisture when you're out camping and having to do a shelter and clothing and tents and sleeping bags and blankets and all that sort of thing. And a lot of it you learn by experience, by trying different things. So I try to give a few examples here today in this and that sort of thing. Hopefully this might be helpful to you, and hope you have a safe time in the outdoors and enjoy your time out, and get out as often as you can, and try to enjoy nature to its fullest. So this is Perry Peacock with Wilderness Innovation, with a few thoughts, a few tips on moisture handling. Take care, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next deal going around here. Have a great day. Bye.